After all this time, I can finally say with confidence that my mural theory is holding up well. Near the end of the 4.2 Fontaine Archon quest, we finally meet Skirk, Child's master. She asks Neuvillette why he has the remains of the third descender, revealing that the Gnosis is the authority of the primordial dragons, with the addition of a god's curse. But this is the extent of her knowledge on the Gnosis, as she doesn't know any more than that, all of which she learned from her master, Sir Tralogi, the Foul. So this Sir Tralogi is a being from the abyss. He knows more about the Gnosis than Neuvillette, who revealed to us once he became a full-fledged dragon, that the usurper was left badly injured from a great war. The Primordial One was unable to use their absolute authority, which was to suppress the order of this world. The usurper and the one who came after created the Gnosis together to fix this. Severely wounded in the Great War of Vengeance, the usurper had their functions ruined, and could no longer use their absolute authority to suppress the original order of this world. To continue to subdue and control the resentments and loathing of the world, the usurper and one who came after created the Gnosis together. So it came to be that an order was made to be upheld. If the Gnosis is the remains of a descender, how exactly could the usurper and second work together to create it? How could the remains of a being be made into a Gnosis? How did they even come to this solution? Was the third such a threat that it caused the two to work together? Then use the remains to create the Gnosis? Or was this simply an opportunity to make use of the already dead third descender's body? How did the third descender meet their end, and who were they? Who could the third descender be, based on everything we learned about descenders? Before we speculate on who they could be, let's go over who they likely are not. Anyone who originates from Teyvat could not be a descender. So no kings, no dragons, or elemental beings, especially if they existed before the second. Meaning, even if the Dragon King was a descender, which I highly doubt, they would have likely been before the usurper, and certainly before the second. As the war between the dragons and the first concluded, long before the second who came. I'll also add that, while the Dragon King used forbidden knowledge, they did so after seeking it out, to combat the usurper. This was not a part of their element, unlike the second who came. Neuvillette calls the war, that left the usurper severely wounded, the War of Vengeance, which could imply an act of revenge against the Primordial One. But what would cause a descender to retaliate in an act of vengeance? Which I will come back to later, to further make sense of my theory. The only other potential descender is the traveler from afar in the record of Julian. At a far-flung moment in the distant past, the ancestor of the Seelie met a traveler from afar, with whom they swore an oath of union witnessed by the three sisters of the Lunar Palace. Just 30 days later, a sudden disaster struck. The Seelie and their lover fled into exile as the world collapsed around them, fleeing until the terrible calamity caught up with and seized them. Their cruel punishment was to be separated from each other for eternity and to have their memories wiped without a trace. This sounds awfully familiar to the story of the Pale Princess and Six Pygmies, a story sought after by the Abyss Order, claiming that it holds a secret message or meaning. The most we can take from this story, without forbidden knowledge, is the summary of the unreleased volumes. In this story, the Pale Princess meets the Light Prince. They work together to save the Moonlight Forest, but they are betrayed by the Six Pygmies. At the end they fall victim to the Pygmies' wicked scheme, and all we're left with is the Night Mother's prophecy. What we should take from this, is the tragic end of the couple, similar to the ancient Seelie and traveler from afar. If this Light Prince is in fact a descender, how can we assume that they're the third and not the second? What could possibly differentiate the two? In Before Sun and Moon, long after the war between the Primordial One and the Sovereigns. After was the war between the first and the second who came. Specifically, only mentioning the second. During the war between the Descenders, the heavens collapsed. This is likely in reference to what the goddess of flowers spoke of, in the Paradise Lost set. But, in time, invaders descended from beyond the firmament, bringing with them destruction, overturning rivers, spreading plagues. She refers to invaders, as if there were multiple. But in Before Sun and Moon, there is only one mentioned, being the second who came. So why might the goddess of flowers speak of invaders instead of just the second or third descender? She also mentioned that the invaders brought war to her former kin, they also brought about illusions that could break through shackles to the land. I believe these acts to be separate between the second and third. Also, the war of vengeance resulted in the creation of the Gnosis. Which is to say, the second was not the descender that sparked that war. So again, why is this a war of vengeance? Could this war be in response to the second? Back to my question of why it is a war of vengeance. Was the third trying to avenge the second? Why would that be? Unless they were related. The goddess of flowers mentioned invaders but did not specify on whether they came together, or one after the other, leaving me to believe they came in a succession, with little time between each other. Which could justify not mentioning the second but also not the third, as they nearly came together, also sharing many similarities. Which would make sense, to group them together instead of separate. But how might this play into my theory? There is a story of two siblings that come to mind. It is said that there was once a kingdom in the heavens that sent its first heir to a kingdom of darkness. This heir would be deceived, and becomes the queen of this kingdom of darkness. But where the first had failed, the second takes up the path where his sister had fallen. What if the invaders in the Paradise Lost set are the heirs mentioned in the Battle Pass? The second heir is the Light Prince and the first is none other than the sustainer of heavenly principles. Now think, why would an invader, who brought war, care about the usurper losing their absolute authority? Then suddenly join the opposition, to aid them in their struggle against the order of the world. You might say, they had a common enemy. But I'd say the interest of the invaders had nothing to do with the order of the world, or rather the opposite. In this I believe the first heir was defeated, and corrupted, which took shape as the sustainer of heavenly principles. The result of this corruption, or control, takes the form of the affliction on her arm. As a result comes the powers shown in our battle against her, possibly being an offshoot of the Primordial One's true power. Now I believe this is what is meant when the first heir becomes the Queen of Darkness. She is under the control of the Primordial One. Whereas the second heir tried to ally with the Seelies against the throne, but in his battle he was only able to injure the god, to align with the Pale Princess and record of Julian. In the end the prince met his fate, ultimately becoming the Gnosis. What is the purpose of the Gnosis and what exactly is the god's curse? Here's what I think the purpose of the Gnosis is. But first let's go over what we know about the Gnosis, which is very little. They hold the power of the primordial dragons. They were rewards to those 7 winners of the Archon War. A Gnosis that does not belong to the Archon cannot be used effectively. Lastly, the Gnosis have a curse of a god. I'll quickly touch on who I believe this god is. Phanes, or rather the usurper. This curse is its rule of the world. Not much more I can say about that, but to what the Gnosis can do for the Tsaritsa. I'll just say I don't think she truly understands the Gnosis, or rather whatever her plan is, will either come up short, or will not pan out as expected. This is to say, I doubt the Primordial One left all the pieces to defeat it, or take away its authority of the world, leaving that threat in the hands of lesser gods. Yeah, personally I don't think there is a peace in Celestia. The usurper was badly beating, leading to the creation of the Gnosis. The Gnosis is mostly the power of the dragons. That is not to say the object, or rather the remains of the third, is also connected to the dragons. But more importantly, the usurper defeated the dragons without fail, without the Gnosis. Now there is a possibility that there were some form of Gnosis beforehand, but I do not believe they are the same as the ones present. Like before, I questioned what did this idea even come from. Simple, the dragons. Possibly. The Gnosis could also be knowledge unique to the Primordial One. But again, they defeated the dragons, so if all it does is give back the powers, the dragons stand no chance. The Primordial One is unbothered by that possibility. So I think the Gnosis are played up to be more valuable than they actually are. Which is probably why the Abyss Twin and the Abyss Order seem to have no interest in the Gnosis, as it's a fool's errand. Whatever the Tsaritsa has planned will likely involve knowledge unique to the Archons. But a reminder that even a sovereign did not fully know the truth behind the Gnosis, so how could the Tsaritsa Which leads me to the only threat to the usurper. The one who led them to create the Gnosis in the first place. The second heir, the Light Prince. The sinner. Now if the Gnosis is the remains of the third descender, could gathering them bring them back? If that is a possibility, I don't think anyone is currently aware of that. Or rather, whatever state the sinner is in, has unknown conditions, making that unlikely. In The Pale Princess and Six Pygmies, there is a prophecy foretold by the Night Mother. And I did succumb to forbidden knowledge, except this is not about the prophecy. Instead, this is about the Gnosis likely mentioned in The Pale Princess and Six Pygmies. Volume 6. Spoilers ahead. In her sleep, the princess had no idea how the prince was being tortured. In her dream, her lover's body glowed with luminous colors and light scattered gently like satin. The sweet sunlight finally broke through the dark clouds and sprinkled on the living. The orange glow of the setting sun painted a layer of caramel on the blue lake, making the water as sweet as nectar. New colors were painted on the black hills and the ruined city was turned into a candy castle. However, when the princess called the prince by name, all she heard in reply were indistinguishable words. The poor princess had no idea that the prince could no longer respond to her calling. The colors are the Gnosis, and from this came a change to the world. Oh, and by the way, it's looking like my theory of the Pygmies being the Moon Sisters is looking very likely. By the way, I didn't just skip to the forbidden knowledge. It was a progression. Once I started to pick apart the mural, and realize it was potentially tying to the story of the Pale Princess, in which, I would succumb to arrogation. But after reading the story in its entirety, my theory just seemed to fit together. Also, I don't think we are the hero but rather our twin. Yeah, so I'm willing to bet the third is the second heir who is also the sinner. And Sir Tralogi is a denizen of the Heirs Abyss civilization. That or the Visionary, but personally I think both are from the Abyss. Unlike Skirk, who I think is a mutated human from Teyvat. Simply because she says she was raised by the Fowl since she was a little girl. That's basically what she said. But that's not really of much importance to this video. And obviously, the Fowl is the creator of Fowl Legacy, and is a legend from Skirk's mention of him. So I'm guessing some type of abyssal legendary hero. The Visionary could be from Teyvat or the Abyss, but apparently Rhyndautri is with them, so who knows? I think this reveal is a little too early because I don't think my theory is all that cracked, but apparently I'm the only one who put those pieces together. Could still be wrong, only time will tell.